So I've called this piece, which I just finished, BEE HIVE, and it's the projection is coming from a 696 UI Epson projector, short-throw projector, which is up on the ceiling. It's about 4 feet away from the wall, from the quote-unquote canvas. And this is obviously a digital media coming from the Millumin software. And this is a software I use often, but it allows for multiplicity of columns and time and internet connections and all the rest of it, audio. I've only used a fraction of what I need for my own work, and I seem to have settled into a groove that I'm fairly comfortable with. But the notion that things, bees, insects, disturbances, incongruities in the piece is something that I'm very keen. I don't do it consciously, but it seems to be a very important part of my own work, my work habits, how I proceed. And in this case, it is, I think I might argue that it is that as soon as you settle down, something comes along and bites you in the ass or makes you unbalanced, refuses to let you settle in, or maybe refuses to let you sleep in the mode you're in. And there's always something in life and in painting, in my painting, that comes along to say, okay, you think you're settled now, but wait, you're not. So this could be small disturbances, incongruities, or it could be large ones. There are various ways of approaching that metaphysical concept, if you will, but that's one of my ways that I do it. So, and I don't do it on purpose. It just happens that way. And so maybe the subtext of that is something that Alan Watts would call the world jiggles, as opposed to rigorous, dogmatic, scientific, industrial, mechanical lines, a la Mondrian, for example. Incidentally, what's interesting about Mondrian's lines is that they're not strict, they're not rigorous. If you look closely, you'll see that they're handmade, or they seem to be handmade. So anyway, that's a reference to, although Mondrian echoes the industrialization of society, Western society, it doesn't stop with that. That's only one of its temporary aspects. It goes beyond that. But be that as it may. So another part of this is that the whole thing echoes what I did, or as an example, extended example of what I did when I was very young in my teens and a little bit later on when I built light boxes where I had several layers. And so for some reason, and I know this goes against established, what would you call it, a kind of established dogma with modern art, but that it is once, you do your last paintbrush stroke, and all of a sudden everything falls into place, and that's it. Well, for me, it falls into place, but it falls into place on a way to dissolution. So the whole feel of it seems to me like it's barely hanging together and ready to dissolve. And that's pretty much the way I feel about my moment by moment existence. It's ready to dissolve. So that feeling echoes the way I feel about life and who I am. And even when I look at something that I think, okay, a Rembrandt or Velasquez or Monet or Peter Doig or Sarrazzi or whomever, I walk away, I look at it for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then it's gone, because I'm gone, So my motion takes me away from the static quality of the work. I look at it, and I never feel static. I never feel like that's it, it's done. So maybe the artist who executes the work feels, okay, it's done. you throw away the brush, you walk away, so now it's done, or you've done your final stroke and now it's done. But in point of fact, nothing about my life on a moment-by-moment basis feels complete or done. It's incongruous and a fragment as important to me, fragmentation, as the sense of cohesive that I find in some great paintings. In addition to that, so you might call these disparate elements. In addition to that, I have refrains, if you will, that I keep working with. There's the influence of the female nude, sexuality. I thought maybe at one point that I would call this work Tender Pink Spots. So there's a reference here, and in the central glass painting, which, by the way, again, another accident, I think in this case a happy one. This work that the oil painting on glass, quarter-inch glass, I did, I don't know, 20 years ago maybe, and it's been sitting in my studio somewhere out of sight. I was looking for something else to add on a third or fourth or fifth layer to my quote-unquote light box, extended light box. I tried several things that didn't seem to work for me. And I finally said, well, what the heck, what if I put that up? And I put it up and I thought, well, okay, it's got some possibilities. Maybe I'll use that as a template to hang a sheet of 4x8 acrylic and paint on that and see where that goes. Then I thought, as I looked at it more and more, there's something in it that seemed to say, okay, it's okay the way it is. So anyway, the soft pink spot, of course, has a reference to sex, to a vagina. And so the sensuality of that seems to me an intimate part of this work, as well as the dissolution. Also, Vincent van Gogh up on top, which is one of the early reasons that I got into painting in the first place, although I was drawing and painting as a kid way before I learned how to speak or tell time. But and I was encouraged and applauded, so to speak, when I did it as a kid, because people thought, my mom especially, thought, well, this is really pretty good. You can draw a cup, or you can draw a pencil, you can draw on a piece of paper. Also, of course, when I was a kid, I used to do, in Switzerland, there was this decab paper you could buy, and it had images, beautiful pictures on it. You would wet the back of it and then put it decab down onto a piece of white paper. And as you wet the back of it, you can then peel the backing off, and it would reveal the painting on the decab. And so a sense of Paul Klee making the invisible visible, and as well as Francis Bacon, I think, painting is like a snail that leaves a trace. I mean, that's a common perception in terms of what the activity of art making is. So that element is in there for me. And maybe that goes to the dissolution of the work. It barely hangs together by a thread. So on the left, of course, I have a small little table, and then I've experimented with 2 or 3 different motion paintings. I came across this one was originally 644/80, 3 contiguous motion paintings, animations that I had created to make one piece that could be visible in about 30 feet by 10 feet, whatever it was. But I had done this, I think, in 2005 or 6, and I made a single screen version out of it. Ultimately, I put that on the Raspberry Pi I think it's 3.5 Raspberry Pi. And so that's coming out of the Pi into the back of this little monitor at 1920 1080. And the audio on there, as I mentioned, is about indulgence and pleasure, and kind of a tongue-in-cheek riff on eating nuts, eating food, how much is enough. So it has also the flute on it. I don't want to be disturbed while I look at this piece by any audio. So let's see, what else? It's, oddly enough, when I was in 1980s, roughly late 70s to 1980s, before the advent of the flat television screen, I had worked several years on work including video and oil paints and glass. And if you see this work, you'll see that it was a combination of television screens, sometimes 2 or 3 or 4, with motion being fed from half-inch tape, reel-to-reel, old reel-to-reel stuff. But the point that I'm making is that they were disparate, you might say, disparate elements, and I've always enjoyed that kind of compare and contrast. So to me, the left screen, which shows the Anderson piece, as it changes the way I look at that 8 feet by 8 feet motion painting, because the colors then interact with various colors. For example, this kind of like soft gray green that I'm looking at with gray and white interacts with aspects of the motion painting and the oil paints that are on the large 8 by 8 foot canvas. And as the color changes on the Anderson, sometimes dominated by 1 or 2 colors, red or yellow or blue or green, it echoes, it creates new views of the motion painting as it is, of this BEE HIVE. And sometimes it seems to echo or connect with some of the splotches of oil paint in the middle, sometimes the light gray, green, yellow on the canvas itself, or anyway, it keeps changing, and it's a little bit like the French say, plus ça change, plus ça reste le même. So the more it changes, the more it seems to say the same. So there's a way of encompassing this piece in fragments that somehow extends beyond the immediate totality of the perception. And I don't know if it plays with memory. It could. Of course, Millumin plays with memory. You could think of the various layers as memory. You could think of a light box with various panes of glass or plastic on it as metaphysical layers and psychological layers, aspects of whatever it happens to be that you can see through and around. So it gives you also a different sense of space, of the z-axis. And that, of course, is typical of the digital world, which allows you to explore the z-axis, to explore recesses in fact and in the mind as you come across them. The other thing is that the digital information on the small screen has a clarity and a lightness to it that the oil paint and the projection does not have. There is a kind of you might argue that one is young and one is old. The large motion painting with oil paint is kind of like an old woman, a seasoned old woman who's like, it's not a young person. It's like there's a history there. There's a passage of time, of wear and tear. Whereas in the digital world with a small screen, that's not the case. There's a kind of a youthful freshness to, at least to me, and an immobility, a lack of soft corners, if you will. So, and that's, I think, part of the digital world. The digital world is essentially a con artist. I mean, when you compare it to oil painting and oil paints that are matter, and matter is transient. It is here and gone. It comes and goes. Matter has a, let's see, how might I describe it? An infinite depth that is timeless beyond itself, beyond matter. It has a subtext, a substrata, beyond the jiggle. Beyond, there is a kind of a deep space, a stillness, and that exists in matter. There's a stillness in what you see and where you live, how you feel. Digital world doesn't have that stillness. It has, and that's why I call it kind of a con artist. And you know what? This is why I went back to, after all of the digital work that I've been working on, I went back to working with oil paint and reintroducing oil paint, i.e. matter, into my work, because the digital world in and of itself is not satisfying. It's, if oil painting is a lie that reveals the truth, digital world is a lie that reveals a lie. It doesn't, in some ways, it doesn't transcend that. So, anyway, the amalgamation of these disparate and disparate, is that a word? Elements are pleasing. And I'm pretty happy with the way this came out. Good to say, in all of its frayed edges. And I'm keenly aware of that now that I'm 83, so that resonates with me in a way that feels comfortable, feels knowable, and yet totally a mystery. Totally a mystery. Let's see, what else could I say? I could say more, but in terms of this piece, at least for this short little video, I think I've said pretty much everything that I want to say, at least at this time. I like the messiness. I like the confusion of it. And if somebody says to me it's not done, well, nothing is ever done. I think I'll have done that. It's meant for continuous viewing in daylight or tungsten and fluorescent lights in maybe a semi-darkened environment, but I prefer lights that are more rather than less. In this case, unlike some of my other motion paintings that require a penumbral environment, fancy word, this work is meant to be seen in broad daylight and continuously, and it exists in that realm of the imagination.